Now, in response to the evidence about climate change, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has been making statements about the causes of climate change in each of the 4 reports they've issued over the last 18 years. In 1990, they said the unequivocal detection of the enhanced greenhouse effect from observations is not likely for a decade or more. Okay, there are scientists writing this report, so they have to use some jargon. Detection means, can we be sure we're seeing a change that's not just due to variations in the weather? So in 1990, they said, well, you know, we really can't tell, and we don't think we're going to be able to tell for at least another 10 years. In 1995, the picture changed a little bit. The statement then was, the balance of evidence suggests a discernible human influence on global climate. So, pay attention to the words very carefully. Balance of evidence means that not necessarily all of the signs were pointing the same way, but when you take everything into account, the evidence suggested a discernible means you can tell it's there. It doesn't mean it's the dominant, but a discernible human influence on global climate. That was 1995. Okay, some more time goes by. Now it's 2000. Another report comes out and it says, most of the observed warming over the last 50 years is likely to have been due to the increase in greenhouse gas concentrations. And in the language of the IPCC, likely has a specific quantitative definition. The definition is 2 out of 3 chance or better. So the confidence that this was being due to human activities had increased by 2000. And then in this year's report, most of the observed increase in globally average temperature since the mid-20th century is very likely due to the observed increase of anthropogenic or human-induced greenhouse gas concentrations. Very likely meaning more than a 90% chance. We have here in this panel labeled global, this black line is a decade by decade representation of the temperatures for the past 100 years based on measurements, based on observations. In blue is an attempt to simulate those temperature changes using only the natural factors that influence climate. Volcanic eruptions influence the climate. The change in the small changes in the brightness of the sun, which have been measured and reconstructed, affect the climate. So the blue band are simulations by the model without any human effects, just the natural effects. And what we see is that that band doesn't really match the observations very well. Now, the reason why it's a band is because there's some uncertainty, and we try to capture that uncertainty by running many models, all of them a little bit different. But the observed temperatures are totally outside of that band. When we add the human-induced effects on climate to the natural effects, then we get a much better agreement, and in particular can see this dramatic warming over the last 50 years or so. That picture is not only true for global temperature, but it's also true for temperatures averaged over the different regions of the world: North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia. The story is the same everywhere. Without including the human effects, the models cannot reproduce the variations in temperature, but when we do include them, the models reproduce this warming trend in the late 20th century very well. So this led the IPCC to say it is extremely unlikely. Very unlikely was 90% or better. Extremely unlikely, I think, is either 95 or 99, I think it might be, 99% chance that global climate change of the last 50 years can be explained without external forcing. So the way this is actually written as extremely unlikely, that means there's only maybe a 1 in 100 chance that the climate change of the last 50 years can be explained without external forcing, which in this case means these human-induced changes in climate. Now, when we run models to project what the climate will do in the future, we have to make some decisions. We have to somehow estimate what the future emissions of greenhouse gases are going to be. And that's something that's far from certain. It depends on how rapidly the world's population grows. It depends on how quickly technology is spread throughout the developing world. It depends on the availability of fossil fuels, the different mixtures of fossil fuels that will be used. And so scientists address this dilemma of being uncertain about what direction the trajectory of emissions will take by coming up with different scenarios. And those are the colored lines labeled A2, A1B, B1. Those are three examples of scenarios of future emissions. And depending on whether it's a low scenario like B1 or a high scenario by A2, the additional warming that's projected to happen globally during the 21st century is anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 degrees. That's this little blue line and the uncertainty range on either side of it, to as much as maybe 3 to 4 degrees for the A2 scenario. That's sometimes called business as usual, a very fossil fuel dependent energy system and relatively high population growth, rapid development in the developing world. That'll give us about 3 or 4 degrees during the 21st century. Putting that into context, even at the low end, we're talking about a warming that's roughly double what we had during the 20th century. And at the high end, when we talk about a 4-degree warming, that's almost as large as the warming that has taken place since the end of the last ice age. Okay? So a 4-degree global warming is huge compared to anything that has happened during the time that human civilization has existed.